Hello everyone, my name is Angel Nosey. This is for my Justice 308 class, where today we'll be talking about wrongful convictions. So the agenda today is to look at the critical issue presented, the factual backgrounds of the case, synthesize existing research, propose some policy implications, and wrap it up with a conclusion of references. So before we get into the case itself, I want to talk about mistaken eyewitness identifications. Just a little fact for everyone. And this is also a question so if you could propose a potential answer in your head on what you think, and we'll reveal it. So mistaken eyewitness identifications contribute what percentage of 375 plus wrongful conviction cases in the United States, which are then overturned by post-conviction DNA evidence? So about what percentage do you think of those cases attribute to mistaken eyewitness identifications? I'll give everyone about 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's actually 69%. So if you were in 60 to 70% range, awesome. If you hit 70, good. If you said 69, fantastic. That equals to about 258 cases if we just look at 375 alone. And that's close to about a rate of 3 out of 4, which is very, very high. So now we're going to go to Larry Youngblood. We're going to look at his case where he was convicted of child rape and abduction. And so in 1983, a boy was raped in Tucson, Arizona. And then in 1985, Youngblood becomes convicted and he sent an appeal. And between those timelines, we're going to talk first about the main contributors that led to his conviction. Then we'll come back. So the first one is mistaken eyewitness identification. The victim identified Youngblood in a photo array, as you can see right there. There's an example. That's actually the one that he was given. And so we see Youngblood in the top right corner. So the victim did identify Youngblood in that photo array before court, and in court he also identified him as well. And so the mistaken identification was made, and it was also aided by these other improper storage of evidence. You see, when the boy was raped and taken to the hospital, clothes were obviously given to the researchers to see, who was it, and so they took the semen samples from the clothes. However, it got into the police's hands, and they were supposed to refrigerate it. They didn't end up refrigerating it, and it led to it to be degraded. So without the evidence, there was no really serological test performed before the trial. Of course, they had some samples from the victim's rectum, but that wasn't enough to kind of prove someone's innocence. So now that we know that these contributors, the main ones again being the mistaken eyewitness identification and the improper storage of evidence. So back to the timeline. So Youngblood, being innocent but not yet proven, sent an appeal saying that the police had intentionally degraded his evidence, that if his evidence was there and he took a DNA test, he would have been claimed innocent. And so that appeal went all the way to the Supreme Court, who made a landmark decision that the police had no constitutional obligation to preserve evidence, and Youngblood was given a 10-year term. So now we fast forward to 1998, where he's released on parole, and then we go to another year to 1999, where he's sent to prison again for failure to change address. And then 2000, where he's finally exonerated by DNA, and this was due to new DNA technology that allowed the simplest DNA evidence to be examined better. So Youngblood's defense attorneys, once they saw that he was going back to prison in 1999, and there's this new technology on examining DNA, they said, let's try this again. And definitely he was exonerated. Okay, so we already talked about the contributors. Now let's look at existing research. In approximately 75% of DNA exonerations in the United States, mistaken eyewitness identifications were the principal cause of wrongful convictions. So we see a lot of people who are wrongfully convicted, and the reason for this was mistaken eyewitness identifications. So we can already see that there's a huge problem going on with these convicted people who are innocent. Many variables affect the accuracy of eyewitness identification, such as the length of time a witness was exposed to their perpetrator. But however, those variables are out of control, what McDowell says, in the criminal justice system. And that kind of sparks the need for controlled variables, such as how we handle our eyewitness identification procedures so that our victims can get accurate identifications. And here we have more existing research. All of these three authors connect with each other. We have Hollander, Sandifer, and Smith. Hollander elaborated on procedural justice and how that's an important component of an individual's judgments about whether to comply with legal rules and authorities. And he brings about this concept of fairness and participation, to where there needs to be fairness, meaning that the participant will see how their course or how their case is handled out and determine fairness through that, whether things were handled right. And so in the case of Youngblood, obviously seeing that the police mishandled the evidence, of course he wouldn't really see that fairness there. And participation, being involved in the case, being able to have that voice, and this is what Sandifer says too about having that voice. That's also essential, just so that the people in the court can know that there is procedural justice present. And Youngblood kind of partaked in that participation when he sent the appeal to the Supreme Court, but that appeal was denied. Then Sandifer's civil justice experiences reflect, create, and destroy inequality. So Sandifer again goes about the voice, and one thing I want to mention is that the victim also had a little bit of a hard time determining who his victim was. He knew that he was medium built, that he had facial hair, he was black, disfigured eye, but the one main problem was that he didn't know which eye was it. He was just bombarded with, I don't know, left, right, I'm not sure. And this connects to Smith, who says that witnesses may lower their criterion to suggest a criminal. It's the impact of a weak recognition memory experience that leads to the increase of mistaken eyewitness identifications. So now we have some policy implications on what we can do to improve and decrease mistaken eyewitness identification rates. So hopefully in this case you were able to see the importance of eyewitness identification, how much of an impact it has, and the process of handling the identification. Also, you may see what we need to do to preserve evidence. There needs to be a system out there that works solely to preserve that evidence. The police obviously had the hands of the boys closed and didn't properly preserve it, but it's a landmark decision rule. They have no constitutional obligation, so therefore then there needs to be something out there that preserves evidence. And also to question available evidence. In Larry Youngblood's case, a lot of the odds were stacked against him. And people just thought, this is the guy, this is the one, solely based on the mistaken eyewitness identification, the disfigured eye, everything. So we need to question what we have and not just, and not stop there. Also, being open to reinvestigation, setting up an effective innocence program, no matter how long a case was decided. Again, oops, I don't know if anyone can see that, but it says close. Being open to that investigation and setting up an effective innocence program for our convicted convicted people who feel that they are innocent. So wrapping up, what can we take away from this case? Again, I hope everyone has seen that the importance of eyewitness identification and evidence, proper storage of that evidence, just because of how Larry Youngblood could have been exonerated easily if that evidence was there. Obviously, the reliability of eyewitness identification, of course, we cannot just blame our victim. There's also just the psychological and the emotional things that the victim goes through. And so having a process to make sure that our eyewitnesses give proper identification. And as I said earlier, questioning even when the odds are against the person. A lot of people felt that Youngblood was the guy, and he wasn't. And he had to spend 10 years in prison. And this leads to the way our wrongfully convicted people are treated, trying to improve that way. Larry Youngblood died 7 years after he was released, and he never received a compensation nor an apology. So literature suggests that compensation for the wrongfully convicted becomes difficult, but however, still an apology is the least someone can do. And here are my references. I appreciate everyone, your time, and thank you, Professor Brogelberg, for a great class.